PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio, unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, it's that time on a Wednesday where we head to the House of Commons. I'm joined as ever by Tim Shipman, Politico of the Sunday Times. Hi, Tim.
Hello, Matt. I'm sort of wish it was Trump against Biden, really, but there we go.
It's one of the quirks. I mean, lots of prime ministers said whenever they go around the world, other world leaders, but particularly US presidents, always say, "I'm glad I don't have to do that thing every once a week against my political opponent." Do we think that the events in America will come up at PMQs today? Keir Starmer's team have been sort of pushing the idea they're much closer to Team Biden. Is it going to be a fight on to see who can be Joe Biden's best friend?
Yeah, I think there might be a bit of that, though Labour was slightly embarrassed having briefed the Sunday Times a few weeks ago that they would be going to the inauguration and Boris Johnson's team wouldn't, and then it turned out that actually they're not going after all. So, yeah, there'll be a bit of that. And Theresa May, having sort of put the boot into Boris Johnson, also gives them a little bit of material that Starmer can use to bash Boris Johnson as a sort of statesman and world leader and say, your predecessor says that you've not been doing this the right way, mate. You're sort of diminishing Britain. So, if he wants to pick that cricket bat up and wield it, he can do.
And pandemic-wise, having started the year with good vaccine news, there's more for Keir Starmer to go at in terms of the rollout of the vaccine.
Crushing predictability, it's all beginning to go wrong again. The endless cycle that we've had of this over the last few months. Yeah, I mean, ministers a week ago were cock-a-hoop and telling us how wonderful they were, and now we're back to that good old-fashioned staple of media coverage, the postcode lottery. Some bits of the country are doing it rather quicker than others, and how they get through that problem is going to be, I would imagine, a thread that Starmer would wish to pull on today.
And in terms of the big story of the week is obviously my report that Boris Johnson quite likes having a nap in the afternoon, something that Number 10 have denied, although others have got in touch with me to say they very much know it to be right. Do you think that Keir Starmer doesn't always do the gags? Is it worth him attempting a gag on that this week?
I would have thought so, yes. But as you say, it's not something he tends to seize on. I mean, a lot of politicians doing that job, literally any opportunity for slightly lame humour is grasped and run with. And sometimes it works quite well, even when it's a bit naff, because those things can cut through to the public. It's quite an effective way of, if your argument as Keir Starmer is that Boris Johnson's doesn't have his eye on the ball and is a bit lazy, what's a good way of getting that to cut through, saying the bloke has a kip in the afternoon? Lots of people have a power nap. I've been known to have one myself, but I'm pretty sure if I was Prime Minister, I wouldn't be telling anybody about it. And
yeah,
I've heard
speaking, he didn't tell me, other people did. Sorry, go on, Tim.
No, indeed. No, I mean, I'm just saying I've heard similar rumours. I've never been able to fully substantiate them, so more power to your elbow, but it rings true with what I'm told.
Well, I'll tell you what, between you and I, Tim, what happened was I'd heard the rumours and then I spoke to someone who would know, and thinking they would just laugh it off, and instead got a very strange response, which culminated in them confirming that yes, indeed, this did. Not all the time. Very so often, if Boris Johnson shut his office door, it was a sign that he was, having a siesta. Although I was really struck that the reaction to it yesterday was quite mixed. Some people saying this was some sort of puff piece of Boris Johnson. Other people saying it was quite right. Powerful people have power naps, and other people calling him lazy and useless. Maybe, like everything, you could just take a news story and just make, depending on which way you come from it, that's your reaction.
Well, I'm both Boris Johnson's biggest critic and his biggest lickspittle, often in the same story. So it depends, often in the eye of the reader. But if you think Boris Johnson having a power nap is strange, go and do some reading on his hero Winston Churchill, who used to do his most productive work between about 11 o'clock at night and 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, slept most of the morning, had gargantuan meals, did some of his business in the bath, other bits of it naked in front of dignitaries. There's a fine tradition of doing things your own way. What's important, not the inputs.
Exactly right. So PMQ's slightly late to start today. I think Northern Ireland questions overran, but Boris Johnson's now up in the House of Commons. PMQ's Unpacked. What we do is we take a couple of questions or a couple of exchanges, and then we pause the action, and Tim and I will pick over the bones of it all, try and explain what's going on, what they're talking about, and whether or not Keir Starmer's jibes are hitting home, or if Boris Johnson is winning the day. And then after the 12:30 news, we'll bring you the best of the rest of the exchanges, the back bets, basically, so we don't have to sit through all the boring, tedious. Would the Prime Minister agree with me me that he's quite good, so we don't have to listen to those. So we're just waiting for Keir Starmer to pop up in the House of Commons chamber. As Tim was just saying, we expect Joe Biden's inauguration to come up, probably something on vaccinations, but whether or not he will venture a joke on Boris Johnson's habit of having a nap in the afternoon, we'll have to wait and see. Let's dip into the House of Commons and wait to hear Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. It's PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also welcome the inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris? It's a victory for hope over hate and a real moment for optimism in the US and around the world. Can I also thank all of those on the front line helping to deliver the vaccine, including the NHS, who are also doing so much to keep us safe under the most extraordinary pressure. Mr. Speaker, it's 10 days since the Home Office mistakenly deleted hundreds of thousands of vital criminal records, including fingerprints, crime scene data and DNA records. So can the Prime Minister tell the House how many criminal investigations could have been damaged by this mistake?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Home Office is actively working to assess the damage, and as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know from the urgent question that was held in the House only a few days ago, they believe that they will be able to rectify the results of this complex incident, and they hope very much that they'll be able to restore the data in question.
Keir Starmer.
Okay, let's jump in there and pause for the first. Quite a lot to unpick from Keir Starmer there. Tim Shipman, hailing Joe Biden's arrival as president is a victory of hope over hate. Also going out of his way to thank the vaccination staff, because that's the sort of thing that Boris Johnson would accuse him of not doing, of not praising people for how it's going well. Yeah. And then latching on to one of the things that we didn't predict would come up. But there is a huge story, this, and in normal times, but not for the pandemic, it would be a gargantuan story, this, of the Home Office losing tens of thousands of pieces of data.
Yeah, I mean, you think back to when John Reid declared the Home Office not fit for purpose. That was a bunch of lost disks and data back then. We've had Home Secretaries resign for a lot less than what has just taken place. But because of COVID and what's happening in the US, it's the sort of third order story. But it's actually a very good one for Starmer to pick into at PMQs. The problem is, if one watched and listened to the Home Secretary in her various broadcast performances this morning, it's not entirely clear that the Home Office have answers to any of these questions. And if they have, it doesn't sound like they've passed them on to the Prime Minister yet. So I don't know how many questions Starmer is planning to ask about this, but I will now make a bold prediction that the answers he receives will be a big fat zero.
It's also interesting as well, some of the Tory MPs I've heard from, normally, Tory MPs are big fans of Priti Patel, but they are pretty exasperated about this. This goes right to the heart of the Tories and being the party of law and order, and Priti Patel shaking up the Home Office. She's been there a little while now, and this is a pretty catastrophic mess on her watch. Let's go back now to Keir Starmer.
Speaker, that's not an answer to my question. And it was the most basic of questions. It was the first question that any Prime Minister would have asked of those briefing him. How many criminal investigations have been damaged? So let me ask the second basic question that any Prime Minister would have asked those briefing him. How many convicted criminals have had their records wrongly deleted?
Well, I answered the first question entirely accurately, Mr. Speaker, because we don't know how many cases might be frustrated as a result of what has happened. But I can tell him that 213,000 offence records, 175,000 arrest records, and 15,000 person records are currently being investigated because they are the subject of this problem.
Keir Starmer.
So Keir Starmer says you didn't answer the question, and Boris Johnson says, I did. I told you we don't know.
Yeah, well, actually, to be fair to him, that is the correct answer. I mean, they don't seem to know. The Home Office don't seem to know. I suspect Boris Johnson has asked precisely the same question that Keir Starmer has asked. The problem is the system doesn't know. Now, this could either be because it's a catastrophic computer problem or some form of human error, but certainly Tory MPs will be wondering whether this is bureaucrats inside the Home Office making life difficult for the Home Secretary, who's made their lives very difficult in return. And if it starts to look like it's that, then this will have even more legs.
And you do wonder. I'm just trying to think. What day was it? It was one day last week, wasn't it? The Times broke this story. It's been, it's not like it's only in today's papers for the Prime Minister.
It was running Friday, Saturday. We wrote a bit in the Sunday Times saying that they might have to manually find all these records in other databases and type them all in separately, which could take quite some time. There seems to be optimism from what Patel was saying earlier that they will be able to track these records somehow, but clearly not having them all in the same place is a massive issue. And Starmer has scored some runs already.
Yeah, how many criminal investigations have been endangered by it? How many criminals have wrongly had their records deleted? These are proper, straight to the heart of the party of law and order and their ability to ensure the criminal justice system works. Let's go back to the House of Commons now. Let's see what Keir Starmer's going to have a go at this time.
Mr. Speaker, I have a letter here from the National Police Chiefs Council. It makes it clear that 403,000 records from the police national computer may have been deleted. In addition to that, Prime Minister, this is from the National Police Chiefs Council. I'm sure it's been briefed on this. In addition to that, 26,000 DNA records from the DNA database and 30,000 fingerprint records from the fingerprints database. So this isn't just a technical issue. It's about criminals not being caught and victims not getting justice. This letter makes clear that it includes data from criminals convicted of serious offences. It has impacted live police investigations already, and it includes records, including DNA, marked for indefinite retention following the conviction for serious offences. Mr. Speaker, that's the most serious offences. That's why it's indefinite retention. It's been deleted. So is the Prime Minister seriously telling us that 10 days after this incident came to light, he still hasn't got to the bottom of the basic questions, and he can't tell us how many cases have been lost, how many serious offenders this concerns, and how many police investigations have been investigated?
So let's just jump in there, because there's quite a lot. I mean, it's interesting in terms of the politics of this, the way that Keir Starmer, lots of people said when he first became Labour leader, as a former barrister, he could sort of prosecute a case, and that's what he's doing here. Each time he asks Boris Johnson a question, he doesn't know the answer, and he's sort of mounting the case. I mean, pointing out that some of these records that have been lost are DNA samples from serious offenders that should have been kept indefinitely, presumably to see so they could be checked against future or other offences. This is serious stuff, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, no, it's very serious stuff. And you have to say that some of the media outlets that cheerlead for the government would, if this were a Labour government, be finding out precisely who these people were and doing huge spreads about, the rapists and paedophiles who are now potentially going to get away with other crimes. So yeah, when the full details emerge, heads are going to roll. The question is how high up the food chain do those heads roll? The question for me is, in this PMQs really, is Starmer building up to calling for Priti Patel's head or not?
Yeah, and it tends to be if the leader of the opposition calls for someone to go, it slightly helps them stay in their job, at least in the short term. Let's go back and see if Boris Johnson had any answer to these questions.
Mr. Speaker, it's becoming a feature of the Right Honourable Gentleman's questions that he fails to listen to the answer that I've just given. And let me repeat, because he said that I think he gave a figure of 413,000. I've just done some maths briefly in my head. And if you look at if you add 213,000, 175,000, you get to plus 15,000, which are the numbers I get, Mr. Speaker, you get to 403,000. If only he'd bothered to do that essential, that swift computation in his head, he would have had the answer before he stood up and claimed not to have received it. It was there in the previous answer, Mr. Speaker. Of course, it is outrageous that any data should have been lost, but at the moment we are trying, as I said in my first answer, Mr. Speaker, we're trying, which I hope he heard, we're trying to retrieve that data.
Keir Starmer.
So interesting. But Boris Johnson, they're calling it outrage. I'm not actually sure that getting into an argument about maths is necessarily the thrust of what Keir Starmer was getting at.
He does appear to have got his maths right, though. I was scribbling it down. And if every leader of the opposition is expected to understand the argument inherent within the Prime Minister's argument rather than the one he's actually sort of precisely making, equally, he could have totted up the numbers before he gave his previous answer. Anyway, it's all slightly pointless farrago. It's a dangerous game playing with numbers when you're a politician. People tend to have a habit of getting them wrong and looking a bit silly. But again, a little bit of showmanship from Johnson actually to sort of cover up for the fact that, we still don't know the fundamental answer to the first question.
Yeah, so Keir Starmer's there saying, well, what has happened to these 403,000 cases? And Boris Johnson said, well, I did say 403,000, but I just did it in three different
What's
numbers. Just do the math.
They've now been added up by the Prime Minister.
So he says it's outrageous, but doesn't know what's happened to them or whether or not he'll be able to get them back. Let's see if Keir Starmer sticks with this with his next question in the House.
Commons. Complains about not listening to answers. The figure I quoted was 403,000. That'll be in Hansard. So, Prime Minister, that was the figure, plus the 26,000, plus, I said 403,000, plus 26,000, plus 30,000. Let me try the next most simple question, Prime Minister, that you would have asked of anyone briefing. How long will it take for all the wrongly deleted records to be reinstated to the police database?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that will depend on how long it takes to recover them. I can tell them that people are working round the clock, having been briefed on this both by my staff and also, of course, by the policing minister. We're working round the clock on this issue. And any loss of data is, of course, unacceptable. But it is this government, thanks to the robust, the strong economy that we've had for the last few years, that we've been able to invest massively in policing and to drive crime down. And that is the most important thing of all, Mr. Speaker. And I have no doubt that we will be able to continue to do that by relying on excellent data.
Yes, Starmer.
Well, that answer for Boris Johnson was slightly better than how long's a piece of string, but not much. It strikes me, Tim, that referring to who's briefed him on this, by my staff and the policing minister, of course, that's Kit Malthouse, it doesn't sound like he's spoken to Priti Patel about it.
No, which is interesting if that is true. Malthouse, of course, is an old compadre of Johnson's from when they were in City Hall, and Malthouse was the deputy mayor for policing, amongst other roles. And Malthouse is a little bit of a confidant of Johnson and is tipped to get into the cabinet at some point. One wonders whether this might be the opportunity to step up and help solve this problem. The Home Secretary is admired by lots of Tories because she is a sort of pretty strident. She serves a role in banging the drum for tough on crime, but this starts to look not tough on crime. And if your usefulness is in that role is exhausted, then I've twice predicted in print that Priti Patel be moved from Home Secretary at the next reshuffle. This might mean that reshuffle happens a little bit sooner.
Right, again, I think you have to suspect you're right. Let's see if Keir Starmer's got any more ammunition in his bag.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary said that the Home Office was still washing through the data. We don't know where the records are, and they may have to be, if you can believe this, re-entered manually, which will obviously take a long, long time. The letter from the National Police Chiefs Council also makes clear that the obvious place to reinstate from, which is the DNA database or the fingerprint database, have themselves also been compromised. And so his answers needs to be seen in that light. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to another of the Home Secretary's responsibilities. Last night, the Home Secretary told a Conservative Party event that, and these were her words, on should we have closed our borders earlier, the answer is yes. I was an advocate, says the Home Secretary, of closing them last March. Why did the Prime Minister overrule the Home Secretary?
Mr. Speaker, I think it was last March that the Right Honourable Gentleman, along with many others, was actually saying that we didn't need to close borders. But as usual, Captain Hindsight has changed his tune to suit events. We are facing, and it's interesting that his first few questions were about a computer glitch in the Home Office, Mr. Speaker, which we're trying to rectify. We're in the middle of a national pandemic, and this country is facing a very, very grave death toll. and we are doing everything we can to protect the British public, which is, I think, what he would expect. And that's why we've instituted one of the toughest border regimes in the world. That's why we insist that you have to get a test 72 hours before you fly. There must be a passenger locator form, which you have to provide, Mr. Speaker, and then you must quarantine for 10 days or 5 days if you do a second test. And it's all very, I'm delighted that he now praises the Home Secretary. In fact, a change of tune from the right honourable gentleman. I'm delighted that he's now in favour of tough border controls, because he wasn't last year, Mr. Speaker, and indeed he campaigned for the leadership of the Labour Party on a manifesto to get back to free movement, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, we ticked off quite a lot in there in the Boris Johnson drinking game. So we had Captain Hindsight. We had a reference to free movement and Brexit, which wasn't really what we were talking about. Interesting that Boris Johnson is now brushing aside the big issue of these missing criminal records as a computer glitch and suggesting that we're in the middle of a pandemic, so let's focus on that.
Yes, he's had a hard time on COVID the last few weeks, but it's now, please ask me about COVID, please. That'll be a bit easier than what we're going through here.
And also, of course, what Keir Starmer's doing isn't really siding with Priti Patel on the question of whether or not the border should have been shut last March, although lots of people think that maybe they should have been. He's trying to again drive a wedge between the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary.
Yes, it's all part of the same game. And the joy of being an opposition leader is you can flip from one side of the board to the other and take lumps out of the Prime Minister from all sides. This will, is not a terribly comfortable experience for Boris Johnson, and it wasn't terribly comfortable for Priti Patel in the performances I listened to this morning. But we'll see how this pans out. Can they find this data? If not, when we find out what really happened and why, then someone is going to pay a heavy price for that, I think.
Yeah, that recording was Priti Patel last night speaking to the Conservative Friends of Israel group, a call which was then, as well as the trouble with video calls these days, was leaked to the Guido Fawkes website. She said that, she was an advocate of closing them last. We don't actually know if that's the case, or she's also.
Well, I believe that is the case. I had someone get in touch with me over the weekend complaining about because we wrote in the Sunday Times about further tougher border controls, and one of Patel's mates, I should stress, not someone who actually works for her, got in touch and said, look, she was advocating closing them last March, and that person blamed Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, saying he was putting the interests of the airlines ahead of the interests of the country on COVID, which was another twist to the game.
Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting. I mean, generally, as a general rule, Priti Patel wants to close the borders. That's a given.
So, ironically, of course, Tory MPs are frustrated with her because on things like asylum seekers, she's signally failed to do so. So it's
let's go back then. The last question from Keir Starmer.
Speaker, he talks of hindsight. What the Home Secretary said last night, Prime Minister, it's not disputed. Is that she was saying last March, this is not hindsight, she, the Home Secretary, was saying to the Prime Minister, you need to shut your borders. She was saying it. So I repeat the question that the Prime Minister avoided. Why did he overrule the Home Secretary who claims that she said last March that we should shut our borders?
Mr. Speaker, we've instituted one of the toughest border regimes in the world, and it was only last March that he, along with many others in his party, were continuing to support an open border approach. And I must say that the whole experience of listening to the right honourable gentleman over the last few months has really been like listening to a weather vane, watching a weather vane spin round and round depending on where the breezes are blowing. And we're getting on, Mr. Speaker, with tackling this pandemic through the most practical means that are available to us, rolling out a vaccine programme that has now inoculated 4.2 million people in our country, and whereas he would have joined the EU scheme, if I seem to remember, he attacked the vaccine task force, which secured the supplies on which we are now relying, and he stood on a manifesto, Mr. Speaker, at the last election to unbundle the very pharmaceutical companies on whose breakthroughs this country is now relying. They continue to look backwards, to play politics, to snipe from the sidelines. We look forwards and get on with the job.
I know, that's the trouble with politicians. They do have a habit of playing politics. It'd be terrible, really. People ought to stop doing that, leaders of the opposition, playing politics. Interesting how Boris Johnson accusing Keir Starmer of blowing around like a weather vane. This feels to me like one of the most, I'm going to say feeble, but Boris Johnson being blown around quite a lot today, actually. Maybe he just wasn't expecting too many questions on this Home Office debacle.
Yeah, he didn't sound terribly well prepared. Boris Johnson, of course, tends to be described as a shopping trolley with a wobbly wheel when he's veering from side to side. And Keir Starmer is obviously a weather vane. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to say that Starmer has taken this one fairly cleanly on points. No knockout blows, because there isn't the sort of yet the real evidence of why this cock up has happened, but he's had a lot of fun sticking spears into the bull today, and the bull is dancing around and not liking it very much.
Do you think if you're trying to sort of separate Priti Patel from the Prime Minister and potentially Tory MPs, reminding the House of Commons and the public at large that she wanted to close the borders last year, tactically, is that a good move by Keir Starmer? Do you think it might be better if he'd sort of left that alone and just focused on problems at the Home Office rather than then suggesting that Priti Patel had got something right?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that was a mistake. When we talked at the top, there are lots of other things he could have gone on. And I think, that cements support for Priti Patel on the back benches. Now, he hasn't called for her to go, and he'll be able to, if she does go or she gets moved in the next reshuffle, he'll be able to look back at this and say, we helped contribute to her downfall. But basically what he's done here, which is quite clever, is to give Boris Johnson an awkward, embarrassing time, and Boris Johnson will go back he'll drift away from his microphone to his sofa, and he'll be pretty peeved and irritated at Priti Patel for having put him in the position of having to go through this rather unpleasant 30 minutes. And that sort of thing annoys Prime Ministers and makes it much more likely that they will be moved. And by not actually calling for her to go, but making his life uncomfortable, I think Starmer has made it slightly more likely that she will go.
And if the Labour Party machine is working properly, they will be toiling out every Home Office mistake, glitch, whatever you want to call it, every parliamentary answer, every freedom of information request that exposes failure at the Home Office, and you'd be rolling them out now. You'd be in receipt of some by the weekend to sort of mount a sort of drip of this is, again, as you were saying, a Home Office not fit for purpose, as John Reid.
Well, yeah, and if there are officials there who are sympathetic to the Labour Party who don't like Priti Patel, my phone is on, and I'm sure the leader of the opposition's office is on receive as well. It will be interesting to see if things start to leak, if an explanation for what really happened here emerges, and if the Labour Party is on top of its game and has contacts in the Home Office. It will be interesting to see if they can start to get some of the information that will move this from an awkward and embarrassing experience for the Prime Minister into one where he feels he needs to do something about it. Yeah,
I mean, it's worth remembering that back in the days when Labour were last in power, David Davis as Shadow Home Secretary and Damien Green as Shadow Policing Minister caused so much trouble for the government. At one point, the police raided the office of Damien Green in Parliament because of the leaks that he was.
Well, they were running their own model effectively inside the Home Office. Now, I suspect people just about doing it in quite as extensive a fashion as they did, because it did become a slightly constantly awkward situation. But yeah, I mean, this is a prime terrain for a few judicious leaks. So,